What do you mean by the world? By the world I mean the false maxims of the world and the society of those who love the vanities, riches, and pleasures of this world better than God. What do you mean by the devil? By the devil I mean Satan and all his wicked angels, who are ever seeking to draw us into sin, that we may be damned with them. Why do you number the world and the devil among the enemies of the soul? I number the world and the devil among the enemies of the soul because they are always seeking, by temptation and by word or example, to carry us along with them on the broad road that leads to damnation. What do you mean by the flesh? By the flesh, I mean our own corrupt inclinations and passions, which are the most dangerous of all our enemies. What must we do to hinder the enemies of our soul from drawing us into sin? To hinder the enemies of our soul from drawing us into sin, we must watch, pray, and fight against all their suggestions and temptations. In the warfare against the world, the flesh, and the devil, on whom must we depend? In the warfare against the world, the flesh, and the devil, we must depend not on ourselves, but on God only. I can do all things in him who strengtheneth me. Philippians 4:13. Quote, If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. 1 John 1:8. These words of St. John serve to introduce the subject of sin, now a fact of universal experience. The Catholic Catechism teaches that sin is an offense against God by any thought, word, deed, or omission against the law of God. When a man violates the law of his country, he is a criminal in the sight of that law, and usually he is punished. Sin is a crime, not against the law of any land, but against the law of God. Hence, the sinner is a criminal in the sight of God, his Maker, his infinitely good and loving Father, his Judge. Sometimes sinners try to justify themselves by explaining that in doing wrong they did not go against their conscience. But it is the duty of everyone to make sure that his conscience is reliable and in conformity with the true law of God. He has to have a correct conscience in the terms of the moralist. It is not enough just to have a certain conscience, which could obviously deceive him. One's conscience must be correct. A watch is no use to anyone unless it is regulated according to the true time. The conscience is like a watch. It must be regulated according to the true norm of morality, the law of God. Conscience is the interior judgment we make as to the rightness or wrongness of our actions. And such judgment can only be reliable insofar as it does not contradict the only real norm of right and wrong. People sometimes warp their consciences or stretch them. In fact, they are rather like sweet Molly Malone, who followed her barrow wherever she pushed it around the streets of Dublin's fair city. Except that instead of a barrow, they have what they like to call their conscience, which they push wherever they want it to go. Conscience is only correct when its verdict is in harmony with the 10 commandments of God, the 6 commandments of the Church, and the demands of the Christian virtues. These we shall learn in due course in order to educate our conscience. Sin in Scripture. Sin is disastrous for both the soul and the body. Quote, He that soweth iniquity shall reap evils, and with the rod of his anger he shall be consumed. Proverbs 22:8. Quote, Do no evils, and no evils shall lay hold of thee. Depart from the unjust, and evils shall depart from thee. My son, sow not evils in the furrows of injustice, and thou shalt not reap them sevenfold. Ecclesiastes 7:1-3. Quote, For a wicked soul shall destroy him that hath it, and maketh him to be a joy to his enemies, and shall lead him into the lot of the wicked. Ecclesiastes 6:4. Mortal sin deprives our words and undertakings of merit. Quote, if the just man turn himself away from his justice, all his justices which he hath done shall not be remembered. Ezekiel 18:24. Mortal sin brings with it both temporal and eternal punishment. Quote, but transgressors shall all of them be plucked up as thorns. 2 Kings 23:6. Quote, but the fearful, the unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars, they shall have their portion in the pool burning with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Apocalypse 21:8. Quote, then he shall say to them also that shall be on his left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire, which was prepared for the devil and his angels. Matthew 25:41. Sin causes blindness and ignorance in the understanding. Quote, they shall walk like